Hi, this is Food with Emma. I'm Emma and it's almost Halloween, so the ideal time to talk about one of my favourite books, and it's this one, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Also a favourite of Stephen King. He's endorsed it here. He says, a darkly poetic tale, Bradbury's best work. It's not often I agree with Stephen King, but this might be one of those times. R.L. Stine also called it the scariest book he'd ever read. So it's a classic in the horror genre, and there is definitely a reason for that. It's really, really good. The story is about two boys who are best friends, Will Halloway and Jim Nightshade, and they live next door to each other, and they were born 2 minutes apart. Will was born 1 minute before midnight and Jim was born 1 minute after midnight on Halloween. And they are 13 and about to turn 14 because this takes place just before Halloween, the week before Halloween. So they're still 13 but coming up to 14. And this is kind of a tricky time for them. Will is a lot more reserved, Jim is a lot more adventurous, but they still are just absolute best friends. They spend all of their time together, they just do everything together. On the 23rd of October, the boys find a flyer, and the flyer says that there is going to be a carnival coming to town, Cougar and Duck's carnival arriving on the 24th. This is very unusual because it's not the time of year that carnivals usually come, but they are very excited, especially when at 3 in the morning they hear the trains arriving with the carnival. So the two boys both creep out of their houses and they sneak down to the carnival to see what's going on. Will's dad, Charles, also hears the carnival arriving. He is in the library where he works as a janitor, and he quite often at night just goes back to work. So it's not unusual that he is in the library at 3 in the morning, or at least not unusual in the context of the book and the character. It's quite an unusual thing to do. If anyone watching does it, that's odd. But for Will's dad, Charles, it's commonly where he's found in the middle of the night. Charles, Will's dad, finds the arrival of the carnival very suspicious because he calls 3 in the morning the soul's midnight and an hour of despair. So he is very suspicious about this arrival. The next day, when the carnival is open, the boys go and they meet their school teacher, Miss Foley, and she is, well, she's described as being somewhere in her grey 50s. Miss Foley and Jim both go into the mirror maze, and Miss Foley in the mirror maze sees a younger version of herself. Jim goes in the mirror maze and he sees a grown-up version of himself. So everyone in the mirror maze sees what they want or what they want to be like. Miss Foley tells them that she's looking for her nephew who's had to come and stay with her because his mother is ill and his father is dead. So she's looking around for her nephew, but she doesn't find him. The boys go to a carousel which is marked as out of order, and they see the two owners of the carnival, Mr. Duck and Mr. Cougar. Mr. Duck is covered in tattoos and he's referred to as an illustrated man. I don't think he's the same illustrated man as the illustrated man in the book, The Illustrated Man, which is also by Ray Bradbury. So I think the illustrated man is more of an idea that recurs rather than being the same character. In this one, Cougar and Duck are very malevolent. So the carousel is apparently out of order, but the boys climb trees and they see Cougar and Duck fire up the carousel, and it actually is working. And what they see is that Mr. Cougar gets on the carousel and the carousel goes round backwards, and every time it goes round, Cougar gets a year younger until he ends up as a 12-year-old. Cougar and Duck at this point don't know that the boys have seen them, but they see Cougar as a 12-year-old now going to Miss Foley's house, posing as her nephew. So they go to Miss Foley's house because they want to warn her that the nephew who is at her house is actually not her nephew and he's an imposter. But when they get to the house, Cougar, 12-year-old Cougar, recognizes them, and so he gets rid of them and doesn't let them tell Miss Foley what's happening. And then he chases the boys back to the carnival, and they realise quite quickly that he is planning to go on the carousel forwards and age forward again so that he can get them, basically. Jim, already keen to be more grown up anyway, gets on the carousel with Cougar because he wants to be more grown up too, partly to fight Cougar and defend himself and Will, but also because he just really wants to be more grown up. He really wants to be older. And so he gets on the carousel wanting to go forward in age as well. But Will manages to get Jim off, and he presses a button that makes the carousel spin basically out of control dozens and dozens of times. And when they manage to stop it, Cougar is so old. I think he's about 200 years old or something. So he's basically mummified. At this point, things get very scary for the boys because they try and save Cougar. They actually call the police in an ambulance, but that doesn't go anywhere. But the problem now is that because of what they've done to Cougar, Mr. Dark and all of the carnival people are now after them and obviously have these powers that they can use to get the boys. And it is actually quite scary. Will at one point's worrying what's going to happen to them, and he says, we go in there and someday 50 years from now someone opens a book in there and you and me drop out like two dry moth wings on the floor, Jim. Someone pressed us and hid us between pages and no one ever guessed where we went. The illustrated man as well, Mr. Dark, he has pictures of people in his tattoos and then he can hurt them just by doing things to the pictures. So it's all quite scary as well because they know that the carnival people can get rid of them by just kind of spinning them forward enough times and then they'll be dust basically and mummies. I won't go into what happens except to say that Will and Jim team up with Will's dad Charles to try and defeat the carnival people. And it all gets quite scary for all of them. They're all being promised things that they want, but they know that that will just lead them to destruction if they go along with what the carnival people want them to do. And it's really difficult for them to hide because the carnival people have all these powers, they can track them down. And it's just really good. And if you haven't read it already, I really, really recommend it, especially this time of year because it's set at Halloween and it's kind of this spooky, cursed carnival trying to kill people and steal our souls. One thing that's really interesting about it, I think, is just this whole concept about aging and wanting to be older and wanting to be younger. And this was published in 1962. Ray Bradbury, I think, was 42 when this was published. And it seems, I don't think this is a controversial thing to say at all, it seems like the three main characters, Will, Jim, and Charles, are all Ray Bradbury. So he's got the adventurous side, Jim, who just wants to take risks, just get into trouble basically. And then you've got Will, who is more reserved and more nervous and anxious about the future. So Will wants to be more grown up, but he's also quite scared of growing up as well in a way. And then you've got Charles. Charles is 54 in the book and he feels like his life has kind of passed him by, and he's described a lot as being faded. There's a lot of description of Charles being pale and the colour of bone or faded or grey, and there's this sense that Charles feels like the colour is going out of his life and it's just all kind of fading. And you also get that sense from Miss Foley. Miss Foley isn't in it much, but what happens to Miss Foley is very scary because when she first goes into the mirror maze and she sees herself young and she wants to be young again, but they do, this is kind of a spoiler, they do make her young, so she goes on the carousel and she ends up as like a 6-year-old girl. The boys find her crying because her whole life really is being taken from her because she's suddenly a small child. She can't go to her house, her apartment, because no one believes she owns it. She can't go to work. No one's going to believe that she's the teacher. So she was trying to get back her youth, but in doing that, she's been robbed of her whole life, basically. So you can be destroyed by being older, but you can also be destroyed by being younger in this book. There's a lot about accepting where you are in life and finding the joy and the fun in whatever stage of life you're at, and not thinking that you can't do something because you're too young or you can't do something because you're too old and you can't have fun anymore or whatever. And so I liked that whole message. For me, it really struck a chord because I think, well, I don't think this is just me. I think a lot of us, or generally, we're quite preoccupied with aging. But I feel like I've had almost a curse on me because when I was growing up, so when I was a child, my mum would listen to the Hollies a lot. She really liked them. They're really good. I really like them too. And their song, Carrie Ann, it's about a schoolboy and a schoolgirl, but there's a line in that. And at the time when I first heard it, I was a child, so I didn't probably think much of it. But there's a line where they say, "You lost your charm as you were aging. Where is your magic disappearing?" That line, I feel like, is a curse on me because it always stuck with me. And it always gave me this impression that whatever you have, as you're aging, you're going to lose. And that you're going to lose it quite quickly because the Carrie Ann of the song isn't old, she's still a young woman, just not a schoolgirl anymore. So that line about magic disappearing has always given me a kind of a sense of panic. And I think it just made me very aware, even when I was younger and in my 20s, it made me very aware that it wouldn't last for long. And that just kind of panics me a little bit. And so then I read this, and it's all about wanting to be, well, either older or younger. And then what happens to Miss Foley in this book just panics me as well. I just find it a really stressful read because it just strikes a chord with that kind of fear of aging, which was given to me by the Hollies. I don't know why they wrote that. That was such a mean line. That's so cutting to say to someone. I don't think that line is ever going to leave me, which is annoying because it is kind of a curse. And all the time I'm thinking, well, my magic's gone, it's disappeared. But what's good about this book is that really the message is to just embrace wherever you are and still live life. And, you know, Charles learns that he can still play and he can still have fun. And that's the lesson, I think. And I think I need the lesson. You might need the lesson too. I think lots of people need the lesson. So I do like that aspect of it as well. And I do feel like that must have been something that Ray Bradbury was really aware of when he was writing it because of the age he was at the time. But also apparently he'd always been kind of fascinated with carnivals. And so I think he was remembering being young and wanting to be grown up, but then he was writing it from the perspective of someone who was going into middle age. So I really like that about it. But it's really good, it's scary, it's worth a read, even if you are not inherently afraid of anything to do with aging forwards or backwards. I wouldn't normally gravitate towards a book about teenage boys, but I think this one, how it's written, don't feel like you're reading a book that was written for young boys. It's really not aimed at young boys, it's just aimed at everyone. So I really recommend it, especially for Halloween. If you have read it or if you do get a chance to read it, please let me know if you have any thoughts. And thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.